September 1944. High above the dense, emerald jungles of Borneo, the sky was a canvas of impending conflict. Major Richard Ira Bong eased his P-38 Lightning, a twin-boomed angel of death, into a shallow, predatory dive. Through his bulletproof windscreen, he scanned the air below. His twin Allison engines, finely tuned instruments of power, purred with a combined 3,000 horsepower, a mechanical heartbeat thrumming with lethal potential. Far below, Japanese fighters were climbing desperately, their silhouettes like angry hornets swarming toward a formation of American B-24 Liberators. They were focused on the heavy bombers, unaware that one of the deadliest fighter pilots in American history was already positioning himself above them, a ghost in the sun. What the Japanese pilots did not know, what they could not possibly comprehend in these final, fleeting moments, was that the man tracking them through his gun sight was not a hardened killer in the traditional sense. He was Richard Bong, an unassuming, almost shy farm boy from the quiet town of Poplar, Wisconsin. This mild-mannered young man, who seemed more at home on a tractor than in the cockpit of the most advanced fighter of its day, had already destroyed dozens of enemy aircraft in aerial combat. He was a paradox, a gentle soul, who possessed a genius for aerial destruction. By the time the war ended, his tally would stand at an astonishing 40 confirmed victories, making him the highest-scoring fighter ace in United States history. It is a record that stands unbroken, a monumental achievement untouched 80 years later. This is not just a story of numbers. This is the story of that transformation. It is the story of how a soft-spoken young man from northern Wisconsin, a pilot who struggled so badly in training that he nearly washed out of the Army Air Forces, became America's deadliest fighter pilot. It is the account of how this raw talent was forged in the crucible of the Pacific Theater, transforming him into a precision instrument of aerial warfare. This is the story of how the perfect combination of innate ability, relentless training, and one of the most lethal fighter aircraft ever designed, the P-38 Lightning, created an American legend. The path to those 40 victories began not with natural aggression or a warrior's instinct, but with something far more mundane, something that nearly ended his career before it ever truly began: disciplinary problems and a penchant for unauthorized, breathtaking aerobatics over the skies of California. Hamilton Field, California. The war in the Pacific was a distant, bloody rumor. For Second Lieutenant Richard Bong, freshly graduated from Luke Field in Arizona, the only immediate challenge was the machine he was assigned to fly. He had limited flight time, and the aircraft in question was no gentle trainer. It was the P-38 Lightning, a revolutionary, twin-boomed, 3,000 horsepower monster that had already earned reputation as a widowmaker for inexperienced pilots. It was complex, powerful, and unforgiving. And Dick Bong, it turned out, was profoundly bored. That boredom led to a series of decisions that nearly ended his military career before it began. Reports, still spoken of in hushed tones by base veterans, began flooding in. A P-38 Lightning, flying dangerously low, performing unauthorized aerobatic displays, not over a deserted test range, but over the densely populated San Francisco Bay Area. He had allegedly buzzed Market Street, his shadow passing over streetcars. He had, by some accounts, flown a perfect slow roll around the majestic span of the Golden Gate Bridge. To the Army Air Forces, this was not youthful exuberance. It was a catastrophic breach of regulations, an act of supreme and dangerous arrogance. His commanding officer, General George C. Kenney, was not merely not amused. He was furious. Bong was called to the carpet. The reprimand was immediate, severe, and humiliating. In front of him stood one of the most perceptive and ruthless commanders in the Pacific Theater, a man who had no time for hotshot pilots who endangered civilians and multi-million-dollar government property for a cheap thrill. But as Kenney dressed down the young lieutenant, he saw something else. He was one of the few commanders who could look past the insubordination and see the core of the man. What kind of pilot could take a machine as demanding as the P-38, a plane he was still learning, and make it dance with such precision? This was not just recklessness. It was an expression of total, instinctive mastery. Kenney saw it all: exceptional, almost supernatural aircraft control, spatial awareness that bordered on precognitive. reflexes that operated with a speed that defied training manuals. Instead of grounding Bong permanently, or worse, having him court-martialed, Kenny made a gamble. He recognized qualities that separated good pilots from the truly exceptional ones. He saw a man with flawless depth perception, a pilot who could instinctively calculate deflection angles, the art of shooting not at where a target is, but where it will be. He saw a profound composure under self-inflicted stress. These were not skills you could teach. These were skills you cultivated. Kenny assigned Bong additional, grueling training and kept him under intense observation, effectively shielding his problematic protege while honing his lethal talents. By September 1942, Kenny's gamble was ready to be played. Bong was assigned to the 9th Fighter Squadron, 49th Fighter Group, and deployed to New Guinea. He carried with him his raw, untamed talent and almost zero combat experience, heading straight into the teeth of the enemy. December 1942. The air over Bunia, New Guinea, was a suffocating blanket of humidity and tension. This was the front line, a brutal, unforgiving theater of war a world away from the clear skies over San Francisco. Bong's first combat missions were a vertical baptism by fire. P-38s from the 9th Squadron climbed to intercept Japanese bombers, heavily escorted by the dreaded Zero fighters. For Lieutenant Bong, flying in wing position, this was the moment where theory met a terrifying reality. He watched as the enemy formations materialized against the clouds, Mitsubishi Betty bombers, bristling with defensive guns, protected by a screen of highly maneuverable A-6M0s. The Japanese pilots he faced were not rookies. By contrast with Bong's limited experience, they had been fighting continuously since 1937. They were hardened veterans of China, the Philippines, and countless brutal air battles across the Pacific. On paper, the odds were grim. The Japanese pilots were masters of the low-speed dogfight, and the Zero was their perfect instrument. But the Americans had an instrument of their own, the P-38 Lightning. Designed by Lockheed's legendary engineer, Clarence Kelly Johnson, it was unlike anything the Japanese had ever encountered. Its radical twin-boom design, powered by 2 massive engines and tricycle landing gear, made it look like something from the future. But its beauty was in its lethality. It featured counter-rotating propellers, a brilliant piece of engineering that completely eliminated engine torque, making it a stable, unshakable gun platform. And in its nose, it carried a devastating concentration of firepower for 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. This arsenal was grouped directly in front of the pilot, creating a tight, concentrated cone of destruction. There was no need for the convergence that wing-mounted guns required. If Bong's gun sight was on the target, his bullets were too. With a top speed exceeding 400 miles per hour and a service ceiling above 40,000 feet, the P-38 could outrun and, crucially, outclimb nearly every Japanese aircraft. But it was not invincible. It had quirks that had killed dozens of American pilots in training. The turbo superchargers were temperamental. Most dangerously, the P-38 suffered from compressibility, a terrifying phenomenon in a high-speed dive where shock waves would form on the wings, freezing the controls and making recovery impossible. Furthermore, it had one critical weakness: maneuverability. At lower speeds, the agile Zero could turn inside the P-38 with ease. Japanese pilots, masters of this deadly ballet, could exploit this advantage ruthlessly. American pilots who tried to get into a turning fight with a Zero often died, and they died quickly. Dick Bong was smart enough to learn from their mistakes. He did not try to turn. Bong did not try to turn. His survival and his future lethality depended on suppressing every instinct to engage the Zeros on their own terms. His early kills came when he and his squadron mates, under the guidance of General Kenny's evolving doctrine, learned to exploit the P-38's overwhelming advantages: raw speed, superior altitude, and that terrifying, concentrated firepower. His combat reports from this period were characteristically understated, noting altitude, engagement conditions, and outcomes with the minimal embellishment of a man simply. The doctrine was simple, but terrifying to execute. Do not turn. Do not try to dogfight. Use your speed and your powerful engines to climb above the enemy. Position yourself with the sun at your back. Then dive. Convert that altitude into blistering speed, a boom that the Zeros could not possibly match. In this high-speed dive, the P-38 was king. Bong would line up his target, unleash a short, precise burst from his nose-mounted arsenal, and then zoom using his retained energy to climb back up into the safety of high altitude, ready to set up another pass. Japanese pilots who tried to follow this vertical maneuver would see their engine stall out, leaving them vulnerable. Bong mastered this boom and zoom tactic, but he combined it with his own unique, innate gift, deflection shooting. This was the true Major Thomas Lynch, Bong's squadron mate and a fellow ace, described Bong's technique as unbelievably patient and precise. Bong would maneuver extensively, sometimes for many minutes, just to gain the perfect position of advantage. Only then would he close to effective range and fire. His ammunition efficiency was legendary, vastly superior to the average pilot's performance. By early 1943, this disciplined, intellectual approach to aerial combat had given him multiple confirmed victories and a growing reputation as an exceptional marksman. He was no longer just a reckless hotshot. He was refining his raw talent into a system of remarkable, undeniable, and repeatable efficiency. July 1943, above New Guinea. Bong's victory count continued its relentless climb. A large formation of Japanese bombers, escorted by Zeros, attempted to attack Allied positions. American fighters climbed to intercept. This engagement, one of many, demonstrated Bong's evolving tactical sophistication. He was no longer just a pilot. He was becoming a flight leader and a battlefield conductor. Instead of diving immediately into the fray, he positioned his flight with a significant altitude advantage. He waited, making his pilots hold their fire, scanning for the inevitable gaps in the enemy's defensive coverage, waiting for those moments when the bombers were most exposed. Then he struck. Diving from altitude at speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, Bong's P-38 attacked before the Japanese defenders could effectively react. He engaged the bombers with his concentrated firepower and the combined output of the four. 50 caliber machine guns and 20 mm cannon could obliterate an aircraft in a single, 1-second burst. His approach was a refined system: convert altitude into speed, make a high-speed attack pass, and then climb, or zoom, back to altitude to set up another engagement. The Japanese fighters, with their superior maneuverability at lower, slower speeds, were often left helpless, unable to intercept the faster P-38s that refused to play their game. Multiple kills in a single mission became increasingly common for Bong. His ammunition expenditure per kill remained bafflingly low compared to the average pilot's performance. By November 1943, Bong had 21 confirmed victories. General Kenny, fulfilling his role as both commander and mentor, personally decorated Bong with the Distinguished Service Cross and, in a move to protect his prized asset, sent him back to the United States for a war bond tour. The American public embraced the young, quiet pilot who had become a symbol of success against the Japanese. But Bong was miserable. He hated the speeches, the dinners, and the publicity. He felt like a fraud while his friends were still fighting. He relentlessly advocated for his return to combat. By March 1944, he got his wish. He was back in New Guinea, this time flying an upgraded P-38J, a model with improved engines, better cockpit heating, and crucially, hydraulically boosted ailerons that improved high-speed maneuverability. By April 1944, above Hollandia, New Guinea, Bong's total stood at 28, surpassing Eddie Rickenbacker's WWII record of 26. He was now America's highest-scoring ace. General Kenny, terrified of losing this national hero, officially prohibited Bong from routine combat missions, declaring him too valuable to risk. Bong, frustrated, found loopholes. Kenny relented, but with restrictions, Bong could fly, but primarily as a supervisor or flight leader on high-priority missions, with experienced pilots providing coverage. The restrictions, however, did not significantly slow his kill rate. October 1944, above Balikpapan, Borneo. A large-scale Japanese counterattack was launched against American bombers, striking critical oil refineries. Bong, leading his P-38s, climbed to intercept. During one vicious engagement, Bong's aircraft was rocked by enemy fire, sustaining severe combat damage, including direct hits to one of his engines. Trailing smoke and oil, most pilots would have disengaged immediately. Bong simply feathered the damaged engine, activated the fire suppression, and continued the fight on single-engine power. The P-38, designed with that crucial redundancy, could fly and fight on one engine. Though its performance was severely degraded, Bong, with ice in his veins, continued the engagement and scored additional kills before calmly flying his crippled fighter back to base. By December 1944, Major Richard Bong had 40 confirmed victories. The farm boy from Poplar had become the undisputed ace of aces, a living legend whose score lapped every other pilot in American history. This time, the order came not just from General Kenny, but from General Douglas MacArthur himself. America's top ace was to be permanently grounded. He was, at this point, too valuable as a symbol and as a training asset to be risked in further combat. His tactical genius was needed to train the next generation of pilots. Bong, ever the dutiful soldier, complied. His final combat mission was on December 17, 1944, a routine patrol that resulted in no enemy contact. He returned to the United States as a national hero and, in a ceremony at the White House, the recipient of the Medal of Honor. But his gunnery techniques, Bong returned home and married his sweetheart, Marge Vatendel, the woman whose face adorned the nose of his P-38. But a man like Bong could not stay away from the sky. He was assigned as a test pilot for Lockheed, stationed at the Burbank Air Terminal in California. He was transitioning from the pinnacle of piston engine technology, the P-38, to the dawn of an entirely new era, the jet age. He was learning to fly America's first operational jet fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star. It was a machine that represented the future, with a jet engine producing 4,000 pounds of thrust and pushing speeds over 500 miles per hour, rendering piston fighters instantly obsolete. August 6, 1945. Burbank, California. Major Richard Bong was conducting a routine acceptance flight on a new P-80. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft suffered a catastrophic primary fuel pump failure. The engine flamed out at a critically low altitude, leaving him insufficient time or altitude for a restart. He fought the controls, trying to reach the runway, but it was impossible. In the final, desperate seconds, he attempted to bail out, but he was too low. The P-80 crashed in a field. Major Richard Ira Bong, America's ace of aces, died instantly. He was just 24 years old. On the very same day, an American B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. The news of Bong's death, the passing of America's greatest hero of the skies, was buried beneath the headlines announcing the dawn of the atomic age. 80 years later, Richard Bong's record of 40 confirmed victories remains unbroken. It is a record that will, in all likelihood, remain permanent. Modern air combat, a sterile, technological affair dominated by beyond visual range missiles, complex radar, and data-linked avionics, will never again produce the close-range, visual dogfighting that characterized World War II. The era of the gunslinger, of pilots dueling with cannon and machine guns, died with the dawn of the jet and missile age. Bong was the master of a form of warfare that no longer exists. The young pilot who once faced disciplinary action for joyriding over the Golden Gate Bridge became a legend by mastering the fundamentals, patience, precision, and flawless deflection shooting. He was a paradox to the end. He did not rely on aggression, recklessness, or a killer instinct. He relied on calculated positioning, icy calm nerves, and flawless execution. Every engagement was a reflection of careful planning. Every kill was the result of proper positioning and surgically accurate fire. At the Richard I. Bong Veterans Historical Center in Superior, Wisconsin, visitors can see his Medal of Honor and his flight logs, which document 200 combat missions. A restored P-38, bearing Marge's nose art, stands as a silent testament to his wartime aircraft. General George Kenny, the man who saw the genius behind the disciplinary problem, later wrote that Bong was the most effective fighter pilot he ever observed. Kenny noted that Bong's approach emphasized precision and technique, making his incredible effectiveness look almost effortless through the consistent application of sound tactical principles. The battlefields where Bong earned his 40 victories are now peaceful. The wrecks of Japanese fighters have long since dissolved into the tropical soil of the Pacific. But the record remains. The young man from Wisconsin who became America's deadliest fighter pilot. The ace of aces who turned precision and discipline into an art form. The pilot who proved that in aerial combat, superior technique and consistent execution produce exceptional results. 40 confirmed victories, survival through 200 combat missions, a complete success in air-to-air engagements. The numbers tell the story. The record speaks for itself. And nearly 8 decades later, no American pilot has ever surpassed what Richard Ira Bong accomplished.